Alright, what's up everyone? It's the case we're getting into today. I'm not gonna lie, it's on another level of bizarre. I've been trying to wrap my head around what exactly went down here, and it's just a mess. I'm gonna try to keep this on the shorter side because, honestly, the deeper we dive into the details, the more it's gonna mess with your head and just make you sick. But trust me, even the short version is absolutely, profoundly shocking. So, let's just get into it. The date is January 3rd, 2022. The place. A tiny town in Louisiana called Slaughter. And when I say tiny, I mean it. The population is only about 900 people. This is one of those classic, tight-knit communities where everybody knows everybody. Living in this town was a woman named Lacey Fletcher. And on that day, she's the one who called 911. She's on the phone, absolutely hysterical, crying, blaming herself, just saying all this wild stuff that the dispatcher can barely understand. The first thing the police have to do is just get her to calm down. Once she does, she tells them that her 36-year-old daughter, Lacey Fletcher, had just died inside their home. Her story was that she and her husband had been away on a trip for New Year's, and when they got back, they walked in to find their daughter's body. Instantly, police and an ambulance race to the scene. When they arrive, they start talking to Sheila and her husband Clay. But right off the bat, something feels way off. For parents whose daughter just died, they are strangely calm, like unnervingly chill. And then there's the house itself. Look, I'm being serious here. If you're eating, you might want to put your food down for a minute. Because what they were about to find inside was beyond disgusting. The first thing that hit them was the smell. An overwhelming, gut-wrenching stench of feces and urine. It was so potent that every single officer had to put on a mask just to enter the home. But Sheila and Clay, who were walking right alongside them, totally unfazed, it was almost like they were used to it, or immune to it. The police pushed forward, following the parents into the living room. And there, on a large sofa, they found what was left of Lacey Fletcher. I say what was left of her because honestly, you could barely tell it was a human being. It looked like something else entirely, just to give you an idea of how horrific this was. The foam of the sofa had completely rotted away, and Lacey's body had literally melted or fused into the hole. You can only imagine how long a person would have to be lying in one spot for that to happen. Not only had her body decayed into the couch, but it was crawling with countless bugs and maggots. They hadn't just eaten away most of her flesh, they had started gnawing on her bones. The rest of her skin was covered in raw, angry red ulcers. It was clear some were old and had burst open like tiny volcanoes, while others were fresh, just forming. She was suffering from a severe full-body case of ulcers. And here's the truly sickening part. The medical examiner later determined these ulcers developed while she was still alive. Her entire body was sunk into a pit of her own waste. The scene was so gruesome that the first officers on site immediately started vomiting. They had to take a moment to steel themselves, to mentally register what they were even looking at. One of the first things an officer said was that the body and the sofa had become one. They were fused together. To put it in perspective, when they finally recovered her body, Lacey, a 36-year-old woman, weighed only 60 pounds. And that's insane, because after death, the body often gains a little weight from gas and fluid buildup. But she weighed next to nothing. Getting her body off that sofa was a nightmare. The fabric of the couch was literally ripping away with her skin. And when they moved her, a flood of insects poured out from inside the sofa, like they'd set up a factory in there. She was taken in an ambulance for an autopsy, which revealed that Lacey Fletcher died from a combination of things: acute starvation, extreme neglect, and severe ulcers, which led to a bone infection called sepsis. So, the cops go back to her parents. "What is this? You said you were gone for a few days. This looks like she's been here for a very, very long time." That's when they admitted it. Clay and Sheila Fletcher told the police that their daughter had been lying on that sofa in that exact spot for the last 12 years. Think about that. For 12 years, Lacey had not moved from that couch. She was alive, but they couldn't even remember the last time they'd seen her move anything other than her eyes. She couldn't speak. She could only communicate by blinking what she needed. What was wrong? Everything. Did everything right there on that sofa. They said there were some towels next to it that she was supposed to use. The parents explained that Lacey suffered from a very rare and severe neurological disorder called locked-in syndrome. It's a condition where a person is fully conscious and aware, but their entire body is paralyzed except for the muscles that control their eyes. Your body essentially becomes a living prison. With Lacey in this condition, a few things became instantly clear to the police. First, there was no chance of a boyfriend or an outside relationship. Second, since she'd been isolated for 12 years, she had zero contact with the outside world. That means she couldn't have an enemy. The police knew without a doubt that whoever was responsible for her death had to be inside that house. All eyes turned to her parents, Clay and Sheila Fletcher. Under questioning, they painted a picture. They said that 12 years ago, everything was fine. Lacey lived with them, and they took great care of her. But one night, she had a paralysis attack, which quickly developed into locked-in syndrome. They claimed they took her to the hospital, but the doctors threw their hands up and said, "There's nothing we can do. Take her home." So they brought her home, laid her on the sofa, and there she stayed. For 12 years, they insisted they took care of her. They had a schedule for feeding her, for giving her water, for everything. But then they added something really strange. They said Lacey had also developed severe social anxiety. They claimed they would offer to take her outside or have people over, but Lacey would refuse with her eyes. But how does that even make sense? A girl who supposedly loved life just suddenly decides to give it all up and stay on a couch for over a decade? How do you, as a parent, not lift her off that couch even once? It got worse. When police questioned them further, the parents claimed Lacey never once complained of any pain. So they never thought to take her to a doctor in all those 12 years. She had told us something was wrong, they said. We obviously would have gotten her help. This was a blatant lie, directly contradicted by the autopsy report, which stated she would have been in excruciating, unimaginable pain at the time of her death. The district attorney on the case came forward and said something that will stick with you. He said, usually for a murder, you look for a motive. But here we don't see one, because the motive is something we don't normally consider a motive. He believed that after 12 years of caring for a daughter who had become a living corpse, parents just got tired. They got burned out, so they started to neglect her. And that neglect grew and grew until her death was a certainty. He said, we've seen all kinds of crimes, but we've never seen anything like this, because it doesn't even feel like a crime is being committed while it's happening. The doctors who performed the autopsy later said the state of her body was so horrific that they couldn't eat properly for a week. When police brought the parents back to the crime scene, their own home, to walk them through it again, they were watching for any sign of emotion. There was none. Clay and Sheila were completely emotionless. They described the scene like they were strangers, casually pointing things out. This is where she lived. This is what we did to feed her. Towels for her waist are over there. Not a single tear. Zero grief that their daughter was gone. Finally, on April 22, 2022, Sheila and Clay Fletcher were arrested and charged with the murder of their own daughter. And as soon as they were arrested, the story exploded. Why? Because the Fletchers weren't just some random people. They were highly respected pillar of the community types. Sheila was involved in local politics and worked for several charities, some of which were literally caregiving charities. She could have placed her daughter in a professional facility, but she chose to keep her at home and let her rot. Her father, Clay, also worked for several nonprofit organizations. It's sickeningly ironic. They were out there serving others, while their own daughter was dying in the next room. When reporters talked to the neighbors, people weren't shocked that Lacey Fletcher had died. They were shocked to learn the Fletchers even had a daughter. Think about that. The neighbors didn't even know she existed. Anyone who remembered Lacey said they hadn't seen her in at least 15 years. They just assumed she had grown up, got married, and moved away. They had forgotten all about her, but she was right there, inside that house, the whole time. Lacey's childhood was apparently normal until she was about 14. That's when her parents started isolating her. They sent her to school alone and wouldn't let her play with anyone after. After the 9th grade, they pulled her out entirely and started homeschooling her. No one really knows why. And it was shortly after this that her health problems began. About 5 years before Lacey's death, a couple of old acquaintances ran into her parents and asked, "Hey, how's Lacey doing? What's she up to these days?" Clay and Sheila just replied, "Lacey's fine. She's with us." And that was it. They never mentioned she was trapped inside their home. Back in 2010, Clay and Sheila actually went to a doctor for advice about Lacey's condition. Get this, they went without her. They just went to ask what to do. The doctor told them, "You need to bring Lacey here so I can see her." They never brought Lacey to the hospital. They never had a doctor come to the house. Nothing. Lacey was just left to her fate. By May 2022, the court had all but concluded that Lacey Fletcher's parents were responsible for her death, a slow, torturous murder that took 12 years to complete. When the prosecutor presented the crime scene photos to the judge, he initially refused to look at them. He immediately charged the parents with first-degree murder. When he finally did look at the photos to understand the case, he was deeply disturbed. In fact, the photos were considered so graphic that for later court proceedings, they had an ambulance and a team of 3 doctors on standby outside the courtroom, just in case a juror had a medical emergency after seeing them. That's how bad it was. I can't even begin to describe them to you, and I won't. Trust me, you don't want those images in your head. Eventually, the charges were reduced to second-degree murder. As of now, a final sentencing date hasn't been set. Both Clay and Sheila are currently out on bail, $300,000 each. That's a $600,000 bond. When they were released, they were swarmed by media. Their lawyer stepped in and said, "My clients will not be answering any questions. They are grieving the loss of their daughter and have been dealing with a very long period of depression." But ever since I started researching this, a few questions have been stuck in my head. First, did they have no other family? No aunts, uncles, cousins? Did nobody ever call and ask, "Hey, how's Lacey?" And if they did, what did the Fletchers say? Second, that doctor they saw in 2010 when the patient couldn't come to him, wasn't it his duty to maybe make a house call? Why didn't he ever follow up? And third, and this is the big one, they clearly weren't hurting for money. The people who can post a $600,000 bond could have easily hired a full-time caretaker to properly look after Lacey, to feed her, clean her, entertain her, but they didn't. Looking at this whole situation, I can't shake the feeling, and I hate to say this, but I have too, that on some level, Lacey's parents wanted to watch her slowly die. I know this video might feel incomplete, like I left out details, and I'll be honest, I did know the details, and I've covered some of the most gruesome cases out there. Usually after a while, they fade from my mind. But this one is stuck with me, and I don't want it to get stuck in your head too. It's enough for you to know that something this horrible happened. We don't need to go any deeper. Anyway, that's all for today. I'm going to start posting reels and more stories like this on my Instagram, so if you want more content, mystery, horror, true crime, give me a follow. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.